It's a mystery how Debra Morgan was unable to figure out that her brother was a serial killer. But how was she so clueless before accidentally discovering his secret? Deb's trusting nature. Debra's trusting nature clouded her judgment many times. It's no surprise that she never suspected Dexter until she caught him red-handed. We see a good example of Debra's trusting nature in Season 1, Episode 1 of Dexter, Original Sin, and In the Beginning, when Dexter and Debra go to a party.
Why is your brother here?
Our father made her bring me.
Okay.
While Dexter sits in a corner, unimpressed and complaining about how unsanitary everything is, Deb is drinking from every cup that is handed to her.
Is that all you got?
While Dexter is talking to some girl from the party, Deb's friend Sophia rushes to his side with bad news. A guy had taken an unconscious Deb to a room and locked the door. Frantic with worry, Dexter rushes upstairs and breaks down the door to the room.
Kinda busy in here. Deb!
There he sees his sister knocked out on the bed with her shirt open and the guy with his pants down. He grabs the guy and throws him down the stairs. He could have taken Deb home right then and there and called it a night, but this is Dexter we're talking about. He punched the guy repeatedly, and before he could grab a knife to stab him, Debra broke it up. Dexter and Deb are thrown out of the party, and outside she asks him why he did that. She thinks he just humiliated her, but when he tells her what almost happened to her, she sobers up.
The f was that, Dex?
You were unconscious in his room. When I got there, the door was locked and his pants were off.
From the look on Deb's face, it's obvious she never considered the possibility of being raped while she was unconscious. This goes to show that despite being a party girl, as we see throughout Original Sin, she is still naive and very trusting even in the face of potential danger. If she couldn't even sense when a random person wanted to harm her, how could she have suspected Dexter, who, by the way, was a master at keeping up appearances? She simply stood no chance. And that was not the only time her trusting nature put her in serious hot water. In the 2006 series, one notable event that showed Deb's gullible and trusting nature was her involvement with Rudy Cooper, aka Brian Moser, aka the Ice Truck Killer. Deb and Brian met in the hospital when Tony Tucci was admitted. Tony Tucci was a scapegoat and victim of the Ice Truck Killer who lost a hand and a foot during his capture. After he was found out and taken to the hospital, Deb was sent along with Sergeant Dokes to question him. Her unconventional methods of questioning proved to be effective.
Try to remember, Tone, for me.
I would if I could, hon. Using your charms on me. It's probably the last time a woman will flirt with me.
They got valuable information, and she even sent a hooker to Tony to help build his confidence back. Brian, on the other hand, had helped him make a new prosthetic hand and leg. So, at the time, it's safe to say that both Deb and Brian were actively trying to make Tony's life better. This good doctor act was what made Deb fall for Brian. Yes, Brian had a perfect facade. He played almost everyone around him, but she was his girlfriend. Even if he could deceive everyone, some things he did should have made her question him. Even Rita at some point started asking Dexter questions about his absence. It's crazy how Deb never visited Brian's house until Season 1, Episode 11, Truth Be Told, after weeks of dating. In that episode, Deb drops by unannounced and he tells her to come in.
Get your ass in here. About time you see where I live anyway.
In the same episode, he gets her to drink wine and Valium to help her sleep. She points out how helpless she'd be, but still goes on with it.
I got a little thing to help you sleep.
Wine and Valium? I'll be totally helpless.
You read my mind.
When she gets knocked out, Brian uses the opportunity to take out the body of the hooker he had killed earlier. I don't know about you, but if my significant other of less than a year tries to blatantly drug me, I'm not agreeing to it so easily. But Debra was so trustful and naive. During his final act, Brian tries so desperately to get Deb on the boat. She should have found that fishy but let him convince her to get in. When he reveals his true identity to Deb, he perfectly summarizes her character and what made her so gullible. Hearing those words come from someone she loved really broke Deb. But as Brian himself pointed out, as a cop, she should have sensed something wrong with him.
I think a real cop at least have a sense that she was the presence of the person that she was hunting.
If someone like Dexter, Dokes, or even Batista had spent the amount of time Deb spent with Brian, they would have sensed something. Regardless, this trusting nature of hers is why she never could have suspected Dexter of being a killer. I mean, if she could trust one seemingly good doctor so easily, how much more the brother she had all her life? But her trusting nature wasn't the only reason she never suspected Dexter. Harry Morgan, Deb and Dexter's father, treated his two kids very differently. While all his focus was kept on making Dexter into a killer of killers, he handled Deb like she was a little girl. He was raising his son to be a killer, talking about blood and urges, but with Deb, it was completely different. Deb was always excluded from these heart-to-heart talks, and this kept her protected and oblivious. Harry's refusal to talk about anything related to killing spared Deb the knowledge about what he and Dexter were doing, although sometimes this need to protect her was a bit extreme. In season 7, episode 1, Are You?, we see a flashback to when Dexter and Deb were younger. Deb is holding a stuffed animal which served as a replacement for the real puppy she wanted.
Why did Daddy take the real Banjo away? It's me. It's my fault. Why?
Deb blames herself for losing the puppy, and Dexter knows better. He says it's all his fault, but before he could reveal how, Harry steps in with an excuse.
Dexter's allergic to dogs, sweetie. That's why we can't have them.
But the real reason was that he was afraid Dexter would kill Banjo, the same way he killed the neighbor's dog in a flashback from season 1. While Harry's fears were valid, I don't think Dexter would have killed his sister's puppy, especially since it would mean so much to her. It was also at this moment that Harry drilled the importance of keeping a facade into Dexter's head, even in front of his sister. With Dexter carefully following Harry's code for most of his life, it's no wonder he never gave her any reason to suspect him. But there's more to it. As a police officer, Deb couldn't make certain moves without cold hard evidence. And perhaps that made her not question Dexter's identity even with all the circumstantial evidence. For example, any reasonable cop would question the circumstances around Dexter being near the scene of her kidnapping. They would wonder how quickly Dexter had figured things out. In fact, Doak spent all of season 2 trying to find the connection between Dexter and the ice truck killer. But Deb didn't even pause to consider how strange it was, and instead, she came to his defense when Doakes and LaGuerta were questioning him in season 1, episode 12, Born Free.
Morgan, you shouldn't be out here.
Are you questioning Dexter? Back the f off my brother! He just saved my life! He's a hero!
The funny thing is, Dexter's excuse for being on the crime scene was one of the most suspicious he told throughout the season.
He said he'd kill Dev if I didn't show up alone.
And besides, he never hesitated with any of his other victims. Well, except for that one hooker with a prosthetic hand, and her luck eventually ran out. My point is that if Deb had bothered to dissect Dexter's words or even checked his call logs, she would have seen no calls from Brian that night. She would have found that suspicious, and after doing some digging, she might have figured out that Dexter was a killer way earlier than she did. However, we should cut her some slack. It was a traumatic night for her, and she wasn't like Doakes, who was looking for every opportunity to question Dexter.
Then get over there already, weirdo.
His lame excuse was just not a tangible reason to suspect her loving big brother. She needed hard evidence, and she finally got it when she witnessed Dexter killing Travis Marshall, aka the Doomsday Killer. Another moment where we see Deb's blind loyalty play out is when Dexter confirms that Joe Driscoll is his biological father. In season 1, episode 9, Father Knows Best, Dexter learns that his biological father, who Harry had told him died long ago, was actually alive until recently.
How come you never told us what happened to Dexter's real parents?
How did they die, Dad?
It was an accident. A tragic accident.
He takes Rita with him to check out the house his father left him, and Deb and Brian join them later on. Curious about his relationship with Joe, Dexter secretly gets a blood sample from Joe's body and sends it along with his own blood to Masuka to run a DNA analysis.
Masuka.
Hey, it's Dexter Morgan. Yeah, I need a favor. DNA comparison.
When Masuka calls back, Deb answers instead of Dexter. She's furious that he didn't trust that his father was telling the truth all those years, which makes no sense. Reasons to suspect that Harry was lying were right there. People don't just leave their houses to random people in a different town. Dexter had every right to question Harry and have a DNA test done, especially since his suppressed childhood memories were returning. And this just summarizes the kind of person Deb is. She would rather hold on to a lie just to keep the perfect image of her father she had.
Masuka called?
Your biological father was dead. Dad told us that. I remember.
Such a person would never even suspect their family members of heinous crimes. Her blind loyalty would stay with her until the very end, even after she found out the truth about Dexter. Despite how strong her sense of loyalty was, there's an even greater reason why she never would have suspected Dexter. Number 1, Deb's need to maintain a relationship with Dexter. Hands down, the most valid reason why Deb would never have suspected Dexter was her need to maintain a positive relationship. What I mean by this is that in an attempt to keep her bond with her last surviving family member who she loved, she would often overlook certain inconsistencies in his behavior. One way she showed this overwhelming need to hold on to Dexter was when his late father's lawyer reached out to him after his death. Deb was present when Dexter first opened the envelope. When they find out its contents, Deb reminds him that she is his only next of kin.
Hey, I'm your only next of kin, don't you forget it.
And while that is indeed true, it shows how much she felt the need to latch onto him. To support this theory, I'd like to bring up the fact that she never wanted to share Dexter on some subconscious level. For example, she didn't approve of any of his love interests. Lila was just a manipulative homewrecker and arsonist. While her relationship with Lumen went from distrust to pity, she wasn't her biggest fan either. She outright hated Hannah and tried to remove her from Dexter's life.
It's because I love Dexter. I'm not gonna give up until you're murdering asses behind bars for good.
The only love interest of Dexter's that she approved of was Rita, the one she had a hand in their union. It's almost as though no one was good enough for her brother except the one she happened to choose. Although you can't really blame her. Dexter attracted the worst kind of women, but I talked about that in a different video on my channel. If you still think this theory is crazy, remember that when Brian started cozying up to Dexter, Deb got all pissed about it and created unnecessary tension. Again, you wouldn't blame her. All her life, she had tried to get Dexter to open up to her, and there he was drinking beer and having heart-to-heart conversations with her boyfriend. This need to hold onto a relationship was probably fanned by her father's instructions on his almost deathbed in Season 1, Episode 3, Popping Cherry. Before they figured out that the nurse was poisoning Harry slowly.
About the nurse? Yeah, she's like me. Morphine. It's making me worse. She's drugging you. She's killing you by overdose.
Harry thought that he was going to die, so he told his kids that he didn't have much time left.
Listen, you two. I'm not going to be around much longer.
Dad, don't say that.
He tells Dexter to not forget the lessons he taught him. Dexter tells him that he can't do it without him.
Just remember the lessons.
What lesson? What are you talking about?
A confused Deb sits between them looking back and forth. They won't let her in on their cryptic conversation, but Harry leaves her with a burden. It's funny how Harry tells her to shoulder the responsibility of keeping Dexter grounded when he himself couldn't. After all, he ended up killing himself after witnessing one of Dexter's kills. What's even funnier is how, for most of the series, Deb was the one who needed Dexter's help staying grounded. Whether she had issues with work,
A little more confidence, please.
or with her disastrous love life, Dexter was always there to help. This deep bond and craving for a deeper bond would never have let her suspect him. Even when she caught him red-handed, she held on to their relationship and never ratted him out. She even went as far as to shoot LaGuerta to save him.
Thanks.
Even when she struggled with guilt, she remained loyal to her brother. She did things that went against her very nature as a cop and a human being, yet she held on, because she knew that exposing Dexter meant he would get the death penalty. And Dexter's death would mean the end of life as she knew it, if not life itself.